Годинава е јубилеарна за развојот на македонско-литванските односи. Токму пред 30 години Македонија и Република Литванија воспоставија дипломатски односи. По тој повод, за тоа како се развиваат односите помеѓу двете земји, разговараме со господинот амбасадор, неговата екселенција Едуардас Борисовас, кој што е амбасадор на Република Литванија со седиште во Загреб. Mr. Ambassador, before this interview, you had a meeting with the Macedonian Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mr. Zoran Dimitrovski. Can you share some details of this meeting? And is Lithuanian support for Macedonian EU accession process still strong after all these years, and are you optimistic for EU enlargement with Western Balkans countries?
Thank you for asking, and you rightly mentioned that we had a very good and open meeting with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zoran Dimitrovski, and it was quite a long conversation about all issues of nowadays world, which is changing very much, and definitely also we talked about EU enlargement and all issues related to that. So here I can say that we openly exchanged our views, openly presented our seeing vision actually on how this process should be pushed forward actually to achieve positive results. Speaking about enlargement process as such, I'm really optimistic that there is a real window of opportunity for Western Balkan countries to join the EU in quite close future. And in this situation, we need to take into account that it also depends on the countries themselves, on their actually willingness to move forward the path of EU enlargement, to do necessary reforms, because the merit-based approach is extremely important for Lithuania. We put it as a cornerstone for the enlargement. At the same time, we also understand reality that enlargement to the Western Balkans could bring prosperity and security to the region.
Sir, did you talk about the Lithuanian path to European Union, about the Lithuanian experience? Was it difficult, and how long the accession process took place, lasted until the full EU membership in 2004? And the question is, were there significant concessions that Lithuania had to make in the EU integration process in that time? So did your country have bilateral issues with other EU member countries that should be resolved before the accession?
To tell about the accession process, I would say that actually our situation was extremely complicated because it was the first enlargement to the Eastern Europe. And there was not conviction, for example, in all the former EU countries actually, that this enlargement should embrace all the countries in Eastern Europe. So there were also considerations that some countries should be accepted, some countries should be in a waiting room, actually, as also in your case. So for us, it took a lot of effort to convince that actually approach to have all Eastern European countries at the same time, not making distinctions between them, would be very positive for the regional development. And actually, this helped us to avoid bilateral issues to be discussed during the accession process. But that was not an easy process. Definitely for Lithuania, it was probably the most difficult of all, probably except Cyprus, actually, of all acceding countries, the most difficult process because we had to take strategic decisions in this regard. And for us, as you mentioned, concessions, Lithuania made huge concessions to be in the EU. First of all, we needed to agree to close down our nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant in Ignalina was producing 82% of Lithuanian energy needs. And you could imagine that closing this source actually detrimentally actually affected our economy. The next issue was also about sovereignty of the state, because on the table there were negotiations about the transit from mainland Russia to the Kaliningrad region of Russia, which is between Poland and Lithuania. So definitely it was a horizontal approach about speaking about this transit, but in fact actually it was about Lithuania to give access not only for goods, trade and so on, but also about military transit from Russia to Kaliningrad, also to Russia. So Lithuania also needed to give some actually assurances of that, not sacrificing our territorial integrity and sovereignty. So these were very tough negotiations, very lengthy negotiations, but at the same time in Lithuania it was persistent opinion that we need to be in the EU. This is not only our prosperity guarantee, it is also our security guarantee to be within the Western Bloc, actually, and having these assurances. And when we started negotiations towards the EU, in parallel happened that we moved towards NATO. And it was just 1 month difference, actually, when we joined the EU and NATO. So actually, by negotiating on the access to the EU, we also, in fact, guaranteed ourselves security by becoming NATO member.
Ambassador, what do you think about our bilateral issue with the Republic of Bulgaria that blocks Macedonian integration to European Union? Can Macedonian authorities gain support of any guarantees on its position on constitutional amendment with delayed effect? That is what Macedonian side is looking for a support in EU.
This is quite a complicated issue, first of all, because I really cannot speak for Bulgaria. Because I can speak about Lithuanian view actually to the issues of bilateral importance between countries. To say frankly, Lithuania also is in the region where we have bilateral issues. Fortunately for us, probably, that we entered EU without having this actually in our, backyard. Moving towards the EU, but at the same time these bilateral issues, they do not disappear. So my understanding is that first of all, setting strategic goal and understanding what you want to achieve, that's the primary issue. Then you need to speak about tactics, how to achieve these goals. And I wish that these tactics would not prevail over strategic goals. So that's the impression actually about bilateral issues put forward actually between your countries. Other countries also have on this path towards the EU all these issues, but nevertheless our understanding is that merits and geopolitics should decide actually about necessary, in our eyes it's necessary expansion of the EU to the Western Balkan countries.
What kind of cooperation we can count on Lithuanian support?
The main job for our bilateral relations of organization of our bilateral contacts is done here in Skopje. So this was really a huge achievement, and I think that this helped a lot to understand each other, especially for your people, to see Lithuania here, to have direct contacts, to make possible information and all these things. Speaking about what to do further, first of all, Lithuania is very genuine supporter of North Macedonia acceding to the EU. This is the primary task, let's say, in our bilateral relations, and Lithuania could be helpful. As I told before, we have experience. We have experience of accession, we have experience of negotiations, and we really want to be a honest broker in the process, that Western Balkan countries achieve this goal as soon as possible. Also, what is important actually to strengthen our economic relations between our enterprises. So here I would see that possibility to invite entrepreneurs from North Macedonia to visit Lithuania, Lithuanian business people to visit Macedonia, to see possibilities in each and other country, and simply actually to establish good relations, to find prospects for future cooperation, and to make our economic contacts much more intense than we have now. So that's the primary goal actually of us. So we see North Macedonia as a partner in Western Balkans. We want to see as many Macedonians coming to Lithuania, Lithuanians to Macedonia, North Macedonia, and in this sense I think actually this is the goal for us diplomats, to facilitate the process. We will organize many as possible visits. Already is agreed here in Skopje to have a visit of group of friendship of parliamentarians to Vilnius. So we expect high-level visits both to Lithuania and North Macedonia. So I think that it will be helpful. It will be helpful to intensify our relations.
Ambassador, let's continue with the bigger issues that are for the European Union right now, and that's the new Trump administration in the USA that is imposing additional customs duties on EU goods, and the European Union threatens with countermeasures. Will this trade war between USA and European Union become a reality, and how it will affect Europe?
If this will become a reality, definitely it will depend on the arguments and counter-arguments on the table. If it's worth to start this trade war, and what consequences it will be to the both sides, not to the one side, but to the both sides, because inevitably, if you are imposing taxes, you need to expect, that taxes will be imposed on the other side, and so then it's necessary to calculate very precisely and very clearly, actually, what exactly you will achieve by imposing taxes. If the war, actually trade war, will become a reality between European Union and United States, so definitely will be losers actually on both sides. Lithuania is export-oriented country. Lithuanian industry is very much interrelated with big European Union economies like Germany, for example. We produce spare parts for automotive industry in Germany. Also, at the same time, Lithuania is in very good trade relations with United States. United States are very high, actually, in our export rankings. So, actually, we produce a lot of goods to export to United States. But at the same time, Lithuania is exporter of services. And taking this into account, any kind of imposition of taxes, security measures guaranteeing isolation of some market, and so on, could be very strongly affecting our possibility to trade with that partner. So definitely it will have effects. It will have effects for those people working in that industry, in this services sector, and so on. So let's hope that this will not happen, but also we need to be ready to prepare for the reality. And it was already announced by President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, that Commission is calculating very precisely, actually, what countermeasures could be, actually, in case this will be started.
Ambassador, Europe is entering the third year of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Are you optimistic that Trump and Putin, who had a telephone call earlier yesterday, can get to a peaceful solution to the war, but a solution that is acceptable for Europe and the European Union.
Rightly mentioned that this is already the third war of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and we saw atrocities which we have not seen in Europe since the Second World War. Is it easy to forget that? That's also the question. For politicians, probably, is sometimes this goal prevails over the issues which could be somehow difficult to overcome. But at the same time, we also need to learn lessons. Learn lessons actually of recent and the past. We had lessons from the pre-Second World War period. We know Munich, what has happened after Munich agreement, and that peace was not lasting. So we need definitely to avoid this to happen in this situation. At the same time, this is for Ukraine to decide. What is actually good for Ukraine, what is acceptable for Ukraine, and what Ukraine will look like after such an agreement, you know. So this is a matter for Ukraine. They lost a lot of lives, hundreds of thousands, and some people say, you know, hundreds of thousands of people were actually affected by the war. And in this situation, I think that Ukraine has a decisive voice if what kind of peace or ceasefire agreement would be achieved. But also at the same time, we are convinced that this should not be dealt without Europe's active participation, because this is about European security. Any peace deal on Ukraine or with Ukraine will affect European security. And in what condition actually countries will go out after this peace process will affect European security for decades maybe. So Europeans need to be very active, and the first thing is Europeans need to be at the table of negotiations in this situation, especially that the guarantees, even what was actually in the open, that guarantees will be also done by Europeans actually, in case there is an agreement about some ceasefire or peace and so on. So this cannot be discussed without Europeans' participation.
Ambassador, during these 3 years of Russian aggression, was Lithuania and other Baltic countries affected somehow with the war in Ukraine? Did you have any problems like maybe too much cyber attacks, disinformation, fake news, defeatism, and similar? During this period, and how, as a country and authorities, how did you cope with that?
During this war, and even before that war, actually, it started much earlier, and with some interruptions. Probably it's possible to say that it went on through all our independence period. That actually we were, not only Lithuania, but also Baltic states were primary target of Russian disinformation attacks. And as we say recently, actually, especially when this war in Ukraine started and Russia invaded Ukraine, and they definitely increased their propaganda means. And one of also primary targets was Baltic states and Baltic states populations, actually, to have this under the Russian some sort of coverage, informative coverage. What is important to understand that we still understand Russian. So for Russia, sometimes it's very easy to affect elder populations actually in these countries. So for us, it's extremely important was to establish good this debunking mechanism. So that to separate fake news, deceit from real news coming from Ukraine, from Russia. So in this sense, actually, it was particular and primary task for Lithuanian countermeasures. In Lithuania, for example, it was a movement, voluntary movement, called Elves, because they fought against Russian trolls, actually with Russian propaganda. So it was a play of words But nevertheless, they did a huge actually work to counter Russian propaganda. At the same time, we need to understand in what the geographical situation Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia is. And for example, actually, we are under the permanent attacks or threat pushing migration waves against Lithuania from Belarus. One more Russian satellite country which uses all means to destabilize the situation in Lithuania in particular and Latvia. So actually Poland faces also the same threat actually. We always have permanent presence of illegal migrants which are legally entering Belarus but illegally being smuggled or pushed forward to enter Baltic states or Poland. So actually, it's also a matter actually how to deal with these threats. This is a permanent hybrid warfare actually in the Baltic states and in the region. So we now learn to cope with all these issues. We learn to cope with these issues. We try to do our best. For example, speaking about cybersecurity in Lithuania, now it's moved under the Ministry of Defense. Actually, we have it centralized, and all institutions of Lithuania being supported by this Center of Cyber Security Resilience, actually.
At the European Commission, Lithuania is represented by the European Commissioner for Defense and Space, that's Mr. Andrius Kubilius. It is a former Prime Minister of Lithuania. And he has a difficult task ahead of him in organizing the EU defense industry and space programs. And how this EU commissioner will cope with this new challenge in this sector of EU?
You rightly mentioned that this is an extremely challenging sector because this new commissioner actually was appointed in the middle of the long-term financial perspective of the EU. So you understand that there are money already distributed to different sectors, and money which were assigned for the defense issues are already being spent. Not big money, but already being spent. So if we speak about money coming from the budget of the EU, this is really a challenge for Mr. Kubilius. One thing I am clear that he is the right person in the right place and at the right time. Actually, because he dealt as a Prime Minister of Lithuania with consequences of financial crisis, and these were extremely harsh for Lithuania, extremely harsh, because we were actually in very difficult situation, not being in Eurozone, but at the same time having our national currency closely related to Euro, actually, without any kind of support mechanisms to avoid any kind of turbulences on financial markets. So he dealt in this situation, so he knows what crisis is and how to deal with crisis. So I'm really confident that he will be a very good commissioner. Speaking about things, actually, what he should do, he should do it alone. Definitely, he will need support by the member states, by the rest of the Commission, and by the industry, definitely. Because what we need to understand that we are at war. We are at war, despite that war is being fought actually in Ukraine. Soldiers are dying in Ukraine, but we are at war, and we need to understand that situation could change at any moment. At any moment, actually, there could be intervention to other countries, and we need to be prepared for that. And Mr. Kubilius' task is to prepare Europe mentally to face this possibility, to be prepared for the aggression, and to be prepared at such level that aggression will not happen. This should play as a deterrence to any kind of Russian voluntarism or interventionism or imperialistic aspirations and so on. This should be done now, because tomorrow could be late, simply.